Alright, so next up, we're hitting a system that was a big milestone for me. Not only was it my first portable system, but it was the first system I got that was brand new in mine. Like the PS1, I don't know if my dad got that new or pre-owned or whatever, but that was his, hand me down to me. This was mine, right from the start. And I was honestly blown away just because I wasn't really paying a lot of attention and I didn't even know portable consoles were a thing. This was definitely a surprise gift that my parents nailed. Unfortunately for them, though, after this, I started to pay a little more attention. And as a dumb kid, I see, well, wait a second, there's a better version of the Game Boy out, and I need to have it, obviously. Luckily, I have a younger sibling, so it was mildly justified, but I don't even think a year, maybe a little more or less later, I was able to get a Game Boy Advanced SP. Mine was red. Yeah, because I was just checking out the colors, and there's so many of them. I'm guessing flame red, but I really don't know. I remember it kind of seemed darker, but I don't think it came with any games or anything. Like I see that red Groudon. I think I'm probably mispronouncing that, but isn't Groudon a Pokemon? Regardless, looking back at it now, I think my mom's one friend was probably involved with this. I remember her being there when I got it, and I remember her child, who was like 10 years older than me, gave me a game. Like, right when I first got it, in that. Yeah, because you can't even find a lot about it anymore. But yeah, it was Racing Ratz, which was backwards compatible Game Boy Color game. At the time, though, I didn't know that. To me, it was weird. You had all these other games and, solid, smaller cases. And then you have this one in a see-through big case, and something felt off. Even, the game itself compared to my other games, I could tell that much. I believe it was a top-down game, sort of based around, like, the remote control cars. And I mentioned this recently in a different video, but I've always had a hard time getting into top-down games for whatever reason, even now. So yeah, I didn't really play this one a lot. Honestly, probably only once or twice. As I mentioned earlier, Crash Team Racing was my shit. So when my parents are looking for games for me, I feel like the racing genre was obviously one that they would continue to throw darts at and hope one captivated me like Crash Team Racing did. Which makes sense. Unfortunately, though, Game Boy racing games are not very good, in my opinion, for the most part. Like, they were either top-down, or their Mode 7, which was another thing that always just didn't... I mean, knowing the history of it now, it's impressive, but I'd rather play Crash Team Racing. So yeah, I had Midnight Club, and that was a top-down one. Once again, like, this, Rat Racers, and the next two games, I barely remember playing at all, like, once or twice, probably. I must have gotten this one later. Like, I think I got my Game Boy in probably, like, 02. And this one didn't even come out till late 03. But yeah, this Corvette game was another one. As was Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed. What's kind of funny about these two games is I kind of remember feeling particularly weird about Need for Speed being locked to Porsches, because I knew there were other Need for Speed games and there's like other cars where I didn't have a problem with that with Corvette, but I guess Corvette, that was the point of the game, where this, I sort of felt like Need for Speed was limiting themselves, I guess. I just remembered one more with SpyHunter. I may have played this one a little more. It was a little different because there was like some shooting mechanics. Now that I think about it, I think a relative gave this one to me because he liked the old SpyHunter and that, so he would ask about it too and that. So that was a little extra motivation, I guess. But yeah, a lot of portable versions of console games. But at this point, I only had a PS1. I've got two more racing Game Boy titles. These two were a little better than the rest. Like, they don't come close to Crash Team Racing, but maybe I was a little bored of Crash Team Racing but wanted something similar, or if I was on the go and didn't have the ability to play Crash Team Racing. Lego Racers 2 was third in line. I think the main reason was just because it was Lego, and Lego's cool. I don't remember the game really any specific highlights or anything with it. The other one is good old Mario Kart. This one wasn't my favorite, though. I hear a lot of people look back pretty fondly on this one. But as my first Mario Kart and comparing it, once again, I've said it a million times, but Crash Team Racing, I mean, it was as close to that as possible, but it still wasn't close. But I guess was an occasional acceptable alternative. I still need to go back to this one at some point. I didn't even realize until like 5 or 10 years ago that you can even unlock the SNES tracks and play on them on here. I've always been a little curious to go back and experience that. But yeah, like I said, the Mode 7 stuff, though, I don't know. Not a high priority, I guess. Obviously, I mentioned I'm big into Crash Bandicoot, so any Crash Bandicoot game was also thrown my way. I guess unfortunately, although maybe fortunately, there's not as big of a supply of them, but I'll admit it takes a lot to impress me with a 2D platformer, I think. I'm kind of picky with them. It's not my favorite. I would rather play a 3D platformer, especially too. I grew up with Crash Warped, so similar to the situation with the racing-ish games, the same thing here. Why would I play a 2D platformer when I could play 3 Warped? I feel like the huge adventure in 2N Tranced, which I got a little later on, I feel like they're a little underappreciated under the radar. They're pretty solid, I think. Solid enough, plus it sort of scratched a little bit of the itch. Like it had a bit of that feel of Warped. So it was special, and it worked out well for me at the time. Hell, I actually went back to them not super long ago, and I think they hold up pretty decently as well. As mentioned earlier, my favorite shows at that point were Spongebob and Jimmy Neutron. So those were go-tos for games as well. I'm kind of surprised this happened looking back at it, because my parents normally didn't double down on getting me games, if that makes any sense. Because I mentioned I had this on PC as well, but I had the GameBoy version too. Which is kind of weird, because I always just had, one or the other when the opportunity was there. This is the one exception, though. I also had Spongebob SuperSponge. I probably would have forgotten about this one. As I mentioned, this was sort of inspired by one of Scott the Waz's videos, and I remembered that game when I saw him talking a bit about it. But yeah, the Game Boy version and this and Jimmy Neutron were both 2D platformers, and they were both meh. Once again, I would rather play Warped, and if I couldn't play Warped or I was a little sick of it and wanted something a little different, I would have much rather have played the Crash GBA games. So these two games, once again, not a lot of playtime. Especially considering with both of them, too. I liked the PC games at that time. Looking back at them now, I can tell they probably don't hold up too well. But I just like walking around in these worlds. And these games didn't really scratch that itch like the PC ones did. Although maybe a little more than some of the other ones, just because, like I said, I like SpongeBob and Jimmy Neutron. I want to like these games, but it just wasn't happening as much as I may have tried to force it at certain points, I guess. Speaking of being reminded of games through a Scott the Waz video, I saw his candy game thing he put out recently, and then I completely forgot about this game, but when I saw it, it all came back to me. Which is kind of crazy, because now that I sort of remember it, I don't remember thinking it was particularly great or standoutish, but I think it was probably one of my more played games just because it was something different. Like I said, when I wasn't in the mood for any of my other go-tos, it was unique compared to the rest of my collection. I don't think I even played Mario Party yet at this point. I don't know what would have prompted this particular decision. I don't know. I guess people like M&Ms. I don't know who got this for me back then. I remember getting this other Jimmy Neutron game a little bit later, probably around 03 when it came out, but once again, I didn't really play it at all, probably even less than the other one, just because I had already given up on the Game Boy Nickelodeon games, I guess. And this one was sort of just like the other one. Mediocre at best platformer, 2D. One last Nickelodeon game, even later than that last one since it came out in 04, but Freeze Frame Frenzy. This I would probably put in the M&M's Blast category as not anything particular special, but unique compared to the rest of my Game Boy collection. So I remember playing it and enjoying it a little bit. It was also cool to see, all the crossovers with this one, but I also around the same time got Toon Twister on PC, which was a little cooler. It was in 3D. You're making your own shit. You had classic Rugrats in that, I believe, as opposed to all grown-up Rugrats that I see right there. But I guess it got the job done for what it was. So I actually already sort of mentioned this because I recently played through the remake of Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life. But I remember at school at the time there was people playing what I found out later to be A Wonderful Life. And I wanted it then too, so I asked for the Harvest Moon game and I got Harvest Moon for Game Boy Color. The first one, I think there's 3 of them. I just double checked too, and it was the Game Boy Color version, not the original. This is one I still have. And yeah, because I just remember being really disappointed with this one because, like I said, people are talking about A Wonderful Life and like all the stuff you can do, and this game is pretty bare bones, and like a lot of that stuff isn't here. So I was able to tell pretty quickly that this wasn't the right game. Then it also didn't help that it was in one of those like weird big cases that Rat Racers was in, being a stupid kid at the time. But this was another one though I think that I didn't enjoy too much, but once again, I feel I kind of remember at points trying to like it. I wanted to like it, but it just never really happened. Probably around the same time, I finally got my first mainline, I guess, Mario game. And this is probably a very unpopular opinion, but honestly, Super Mario Bros. 3 is probably one of my least favorite 2D platformers. It was not a good introduction for me. And I've gone back and played it later, but I prefer almost any other 2D Mario game. Except probably both versions of 2, the International and the Lost Levels. I didn't really like either of them either. I guess the only thing it has going for it is that I feel like the new Mario series is all interchangeable, so I feel like I would rather play 3 than play through multiple new Super Mario games in a row if I was to ever replay them. I remember having more fun because I think this came with a remake of the Mario Bros. Arcade game, and I had more fun with that. So, funny enough, I really wanted to trade a game with someone I knew. I don't know why, but it was just when I heard of people doing that, it was like, well, shit, I want to try that too. It was a bucket list thing for young me, and eventually I found out that my neighbor had the Yoshi's Island, the Mario Advance game before it, and that it also had the Mario Bros. Arcade game in it. So I thought, hey, I can still play the part that I liked, and then I have another game to give an opportunity to. I guess I should apologize to this neighbor because I guess that sounds kind of shitty of me, but they agreed, so they got Mario 3, Advance 4, and I still have Advance 3, Yoshi's Island. That's a kind of confusing naming convention, but I'll admit I didn't like this game too much either. I did think it was better than 3. And to be fair, unlike 3, I've never gone back to this game. And I actually did enjoy Mario World, which was right before it, so we'll see. Probably something I should try again at some point. That, and I want to play through the Mario Bros. Arcade thing too, because I saw like if you make it so far, there's like a Bowser boss, I think, or something. I don't recall ever making it too far in that, but I had a good time. Oh boy, where to even start with these two? I mean, I was super excited because, like I said, I was into Crash. I don't think I ever had a Spyro game. I think this was my first Spyro game. But it was like, I honestly played a lot of the Spyro demos in Crash Warped and Team Racing. So I enjoyed what I played. Seeing them have an official crossover game like this was pretty great. The games themselves, not so much. I mean, I don't even know what I expected. I thought it would be like a platformer like the other GBA games. I think I was able to acknowledge somewhat at that point that if it wasn't on home console, it probably wasn't going to be a 3D platformer, but it almost reminds me of Tag Team Racing, where they're doing multiple things. Like the hub world does some very light platforming, if you can even call it that. And besides that, it's a minigame compilation. And it was so disappointing. Once again, this was another one I remember trying to force myself to like, because I really wanted to like it, but I don't know why I did that so much growing up, but... And I remember almost hoping, too, that this was sort of like a build-up for a console release or something, too. Like, yikes. I think the only thing that was good about it was I remember getting the multiplayer adapter for Game Boy and hooking up the SP to the Game Boy Advance and having my first multiplayer on the system with these two games. That, and I forget if this game even had it, but there was like some weird like Dance Dance Revolution minigame thing that was like an Easter egg. And I remember accidentally finding that. I don't remember if it was this game or if it was one of the other Game Boy Crash games, or maybe it was all three. And it was real stupid and short, but I could at least appreciate it. It was so cool to find something hidden like that. The last Game Boy Advance I've got to talk about, another one I got later, obviously with an 05 release date. Mario Party Advance. At that point, I had played regular Mario Party. That's probably one of the reasons why I wanted this game. Boy, this was a weird one, too. I mean, it was solid. I would say as, like, a party portable game, this probably did replace M&M's Blast. But yikes, I was kind of expecting, like... Because even M&M's Blast, I think you saw in the screenshots, they have, like, regular Mario Party boards and that. I thought it'd be that, and you can connect with the, cable, or just go against the computer. But no, most of the games, if I remember correctly, were single player, and you had like sort of an adventure mode where you're sort of going around this big board and you have like quests in certain locations you have to go to. It really just was not what I expected at all. But honestly, I still had a decent time with it. I thought it was interesting and a unique take on the genre, I guess. This may have been one of the very first games I like 100%ed or close to 100%ed too, just because, I don't know, there was a set goals and such, like even with the Crash games I mentioned earlier, like I never went after the gems or the relics, or I don't know, I would just go back and replay some of my favorite levels over and over again, never really advancing in anything, at least past the initial playthrough. Although I may have even replayed the initial playthrough on them a couple times. But this one I remember really trying to get everything in. I don't know, maybe I'd have to think about that a little more if there's any other games that come up when... Because like I said, this is deeper into the Game Boy. I've got other consoles we're going to dive into future parts. So maybe there's something I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But yeah. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. Because like I said, if I recorded this even just a week or two ago, I would have forgotten about M&M's Blast. So, yeah, those are at least the standout ones, I guess.